Welcome to the Afghanistan Project Podcast. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and today I'm excited to welcome back Jason Howk, a U.S. Army veteran whose service spanned major developments of our Afghan adventure, from supporting the early development of the Afghan National Army in 2002 to overseeing interagency teams of civilians working to establish enduring security in the region in 2013. Jason is now the president of the board of the Global Friends of Afghanistan, a diverse organization of Afghan and international leaders searching for paths to a democratic and peaceful future for Afghanistan in the aftermath of the Taliban's rule. Jason's also a writer, a musical collaborator, and an adjunct professor of Islamic Studies at the U.S. Air Force Special Operations School. Jason, it's so good to have you back. I'm still, as I'm reading this, I'm remembering our first episode where you talked about those incredible things you did. And I'm going to link to that in the notes for anybody who didn't hear that episode. You really need to listen to Jason talk about his work in Afghanistan, because it's just so incredible. And I always remember the first time we ever chatted and I was blown away that you were talking to me. So it's always so good to have you and to hear all of your knowledge on these topics.
Thanks for having me. That's very kind. I worked with some great folks.
That's the cool, that is definitely a true thing. And as I'm just going to say one more time, guys, go to the notes and listen to that episode. You will not be sad. So we are talking about recent developments in Afghanistan and in the U.S. in relation to, our Afghan allies stateside, our Afghan allies who are stuck in Afghanistan, just this kind of amalgamation of not so great things that are happening right now. And I think, we should start with the impact of losing TPS, temporary protected status, for our Afghan allies in the States, because that's the thing that really spawned a lot of conversation around the country. And I'd love to, before we delve into the specifics of it, because I have a few topics that I know, are really keen to get into, but what was your thought when you saw that TPS had been ended and that it's going to go away in July, I believe?
I think for me, it's just proof that America has taken their eye off the ball when it comes to Afghanistan. And it's been in decline since before we even left the country. I used to teach lots of different courses, and every once in a while I would talk in public settings around the country to audiences, and I'd mention something about Afghanistan, and I would always get the question, are we still there? And this was like in 2015. People would be like, wait, we still have people in Afghanistan? Like, our country just disconnected from it. That's a failure of every president that we've had since September 11th to connect our country to it. But I just, further proof we've taken our eye off the ball. We have no idea as a nation what the sacrifices of the people of Afghanistan were beside us and helping us hunt down terrorists and, continuing to battle terrorists for 20 years that were being bred in Pakistan and shoved over the border by our so-called ally. And we just never understood their sacrifice. Not just, over 70,000 in uniform in Afghanistan, laying down their lives, but the other citizens, 90% of the country is doing the right thing, and they were behind us. They were supporting us. They were getting their kids, educated, and getting medical systems up, and changing the country. People loved freedom in Afghanistan. They always have. They bristled under the Taliban before. It's even worse now, but we just never really acknowledged what they went through. And to do this is kind of a slap in the face to all the veterans who stood beside the people in Afghanistan, who spent, as we were discussing before this, August of 2021, pulling off miracles by the boatload, trying to get people out of Afghanistan, especially the people that they personally knew and their families. And we get all that done, and now we're just pretending like things are fine. And I don't know who's lying to the president if they actually think in this administration that there's safety in Afghanistan for anybody who stood beside us at any point, or any NATO nation. They are on the list. They will be killed when they get back there. There's no doubt. It's obvious, and I don't know how we could get it so wrong over and over again. And it's like we're trying to get it wrong on purpose. I've never seen a foreign policy that just continues to up itself on stupidity.
I agree with you 100%, Jason. I feel like it's back to watching the fall and
Yeah.
hearing, oh no, the Afghan government's going to hold out. That's like, how could we delude ourselves so incredibly badly with so much? And now we have even more information. I mean, that's how I feel. I don't know. Do you feel the same way, that it's like we have more information to prove the point now than we did in August of 2021, and yet we still are just.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know exactly what's happening. We are getting press reports, by the hour out of Afghanistan. It's a different place and time. We know what's happening there. We can see it every day. Every refugee, every asylum seeker is talking to their families in multiple countries, and they know what's happening. The Taliban aren't being coy about it. They publicly put out when they do things, when they do horrible things. They publicly state it. And they're like, yeah, we're proud of this. So I don't know how we came to this conclusion that somehow tourism is up. So, it must be fine back in Afghanistan. Like, no, there's more terrorists there now than there were before September 11th.
Right.
Everybody knows that. Like,
That's why I
everybody knows
still
that.
can't get over it. Like in the piece that I quoted you in today, George Glesman. Have you asked him about tourism in Afghanistan? Have you asked the young woman that was released? I don't know how she got into Taliban custody, but she's the most recently released. And she talked about what all the women were saying in Taliban prisons about how Trump would be their savior. And I wished that she was right. I really, really wished that she would be correct.
Yeah,
But
we're making some huge mistakes. Just not, I mean, just on the humanitarian level, but on the counterterrorism level, this is insane. We are not doing anything to them. I know Biden's administration wasn't going to do anything. He was trying to push it off the front page of the news. He didn't want to talk about it. He ended the war in his view, and he just didn't want it out there. But you know, we should be doing something here. This isn't something you're going to negotiate with. They are worse now. They're more closely tied to Al Qaeda than they were before. These are the perpetrators of September 11th, all over again.
I felt like when Trump took office and immediately found the orchestrator of the ISIS-K attack from August of 21, that to me was like, oh, signed, sealed, delivered, done, right? Like we finished it. That was what I felt, and I thought, I hope I'm wrong.
Mm.
But I don't think that I was wrong. I think that was like, okay, well, now we've figured that out and we can be done. And I would love for you to talk about the national security. I think that's the first thing to start with. National security
Yeah.
implications of this choice and what it means. That first, in some bullets that you sent me, I'm just going to go through and ask you about those things because you laid it out perfectly. Who is in control of Afghanistan right now, and why is that a problem for us?
Yeah, I mean, you have. I like to refer to them more than just the Taliban because at this point in time, you know, through 2 decades of growth and intermarrying, it's the Taliban, Haqqani, Al Qaeda network. It is. They are fighting amongst themselves over power, and I think the financial power was just pulled back to Kandahar. Like the Taliban core, would like to think they're in charge, but there are numerous bodies that are involved in this, and they all have anti-American, anti-freedom, anti-democratic, anti-woman, you name it, anti-education. They are a bunch of zealots, and they are the same zealots who had the same ideas before September 11th. That hasn't changed. It doesn't matter if there's other terrorist groups in the country. These are not counterterrorism allies. You can't go to Al Qaeda and say, "Hey, help us fight somebody else." Like in the end, they just want to recruit the guys off the other team. These people move and change teams all the time. We know that. That has been the method. I've been, keeping up with what Sarah Adams and her team are tracking of different terrorist groups moving into Afghanistan, all the headquarters, all the logistics. So you've got this, terrorist regime running a country loosely. They're, basically enriching themselves and selling off all the natural resources to enrich themselves while the people continue to starve, have no homes, massive internal displacement, refugees getting shoved over the border from Iran and Pakistan. And you've got this terrorist group pretending to run a country. When in reality, they're just trying to enrich themselves and get recognized as a government without doing any governance. So, yeah, I mean, this is who is running a country now, and it's got more future terrorists in it than before September 11th, because they are proudly changing all of the schools and education centers into madrasas, just like the Haqqani style madrasas in Pakistan that bred the Taliban for decades now. They are going to abuse and brainwash a bunch of young people, mostly boys, um, into their terrorist organizations. And that's where we're at. This is absolutely insane. I think they announced the other day they had now over 200,000 so-called, madrasas in their words, but they're just terrorist training centers where they're going to brainwash the kids. They're not going to learn math, science, and, language and humanities, and they're not. They're going to learn hatred. And I've talked to people who have gone through these. There are a lot of firsthand reports, and a good friend of mine was one of those people that went through one of those madrasas in Pakistan. And him, I got to see a draft of his book. It's just insane what those children are going to go through. And the world is doing nothing to stop it. So you're going to have an even bigger terrorist army in a country run by a terrorist organization. And that is a ticking time bomb for not just for Asia, but for the world.
Yep. And I think it's really important, if people want other sources to look at about this, like go to the UN monitoring team. They did a really in-depth, they always do, a report on what's happening. And they even said in the most recent one that the Taliban is giving Al-Qaeda protection, Al-Qaeda members protection throughout Afghanistan, senior level and not so senior level, which, it just goes to show exactly what you said, Jason, the Taliban Haqqani Al-Qaeda network. And we always knew that, Haqqani and Al-Qaeda had ties, from what I recall. But now, of course, the nexus is going to grow. Tell me about, so, I mean, obviously, we all know what happens when a fragile state harbors terrorists because people died here when that happened. But what about the other challenges? I know that this is one that often gets brought up, and I know that you have brought it up to me in the past. What happens to our special forces personnel, and why does this matter to them in particular?
Yeah, in this case, America and other NATO nations starting to push Afghans back out of their country. That's going to set up a real, difficulty. Difficulty being, another word for a real pain in the ass for all of our soft guys. I mean, our folks in many of their missions are working with locals in other countries. They can't go do it on their own. We never do that on our own. We always have to have locals, whether it's for language, culture, or expertise on the ground, the terrain, knowing who's who. We need local people. And so if we are abandoning our 20-year counterterrorism partners, folks who literally grew up beside, I watched captains become generals in those 20 years in the Afghan military. And if we're going to just say, we don't care if they get killed, we don't care if they're getting hunted down across Afghanistan, we don't care if their family's going to get killed if we push them out of our countries or force them back, then that's just going to make other countries lose faith in us and our ability to trust us, because Afghanistan went full bore. They really jumped in beside all the NATO nations and fought beside us in some of the worst places, and continued to grow as they were taking massive losses and still taking lots of losses of civilians, not just in uniform, but people across the country getting hit by terrorist attacks daily and blown up, and some of the most gruesome, massive explosions. If we're going to turn our back on them, then what hope does the next country in Africa or a country in Asia or a country in South America to get the locals to side with us? They're going to look, geez, they shat all over Afghanistan after 20 years beside them. What would they do to us? Can we trust them? So that's going to make it hard for all those guys downrange to figure out how to convince them to trust them and partner with them, and help get stability. And we know across Africa, there are so many nations in crisis, under threat from, real radical, violent Islamist terrorist groups. And why would they want to partner with us? We're setting an example here, and that will be hard to live down.
I think a part of this argument that I can just hear it. I've gotten so good at this point of figuring out what's the counter argument going to be from the people who are going to hate on this. And it's something that's been done very methodically, trying to paint the Afghan military as a failure, as, not good enough, etc. And you are in a particularly great place to talk about what you saw. And I think I recall from our first episode when you said, where did the Afghan National Army start when you started working with them? It was at a negative level. So, can you counter that insane narrative of that, the Afghan military just wasn't trying hard enough, that they weren't doing enough, and that we should have left and let them wallow, etc. I'm sure you've heard those arguments before, but what do you say to those people?
Absolutely. Every country that starts to build a military or a security force and intelligence organization, they struggle. I mean, the American Army sucked for decades. We only beat the British because they got tired, right? I mean, that's how we started our country. We basically wore them out. There's like, all right, it's not worth the effort. We could probably kill them if we get them to sit still, but we couldn't. So, I mean, this isn't rocket science. The Afghan military was really 12 years old when we took the training wheels off. In 2014, we shifted, from NATO-led combat operations to Afghan-led, and they were literally like a dozen years old. That was it. And their Air Force was even younger. So for them to get that quickly sped up to, you're in operational control and we'll fight beside you now or behind you. And they did it. And they took 70,000 plus casualties along the way. And they kept going out to fight. They didn't fight a year and then go away for a year and come back for a year. They fought for 20 years. That's painful on any organization. And I've sat with fathers who had buried their sons and heard their stories, and sat with fathers and watching their son die in a hospital room and heard the stories of those families. They were just like every American family, proud of their kids for serving their country, and they wanted their kid died trying to get freedom for their country, fighting terrorists who the Afghan people didn't want. So I've always thought it was kind of sad that we would say they weren't good enough. To only be, I mean, you imagine a 12-year-old boy being given the keys to a car and say, drive this Lamborghini to work in the factory. And, oh, you're going to run the factory today too. Like, crap, you can't do that. So I think South Korea is an excellent example. I have heard from many people that have told me, no doubt, if we pulled out every single UN military member and we didn't come back and give them air support, which is what we did in Afghanistan, if we pulled out everybody, a couple weeks, North Korea would be parked in the South. Because no army can fight an enemy that's that diabolical on their own. You need friends. And Afghanistan was facing an army that we didn't beat for 20 years. We didn't beat down all the terrorists. We didn't stop the terrorist factories in Pakistan. How was Afghanistan going to do it on their own? It's impossible. We needed to give them exactly the right tools for as long as it took for us to change Pakistan's mind and stop their war to take over Afghanistan, run it as a fifth province. Until we were ready to do that, I mean, it was futile what we did, but it was futile what they were going to do. They couldn't stop what NATO wasn't willing to stop. So they lost, they sacrificed, they got better, they were still growing. Their special operations were absolutely amazing by the end. Their aviation were really talented by the end. And they did it in less than 2 decades. And the first couple of decades of the American military was shit, to be honest. We were all gung-ho, but we were pretty crap as a military, and couldn't have stood and fought an enemy that was that ruthless for long. So, it took a couple hundred years for us to get good.
Yeah. And we didn't have an Air Force then. And we didn't have, all these different, I think that's a really important argument to remember. We've lost the humanity of the Afghan military because it's so convenient to say, oh, well, they turned tail. It's like, wouldn't you if you didn't have air support anymore because you pulled out the contractors who were enabling that. And if you had seen your partners depart the biggest base they had in the middle of the night and not tell you, and you were watching the Taliban storm through everywhere, like, I think that's a pretty rational. Anyway, we can.
I'm with you. I mean, that would have been my reaction. I grew up in the infantry. I lived in the barracks for 5 years, private to sergeant. And I'll tell you, if we were any infantry company in the world, if they came to you and said, hey, from now on, we don't have any close air support. We don't have any medevac helicopters. So if you get shot, you're going to die. Morale's going to plummet. We don't fight in the American military. If we don't have the ability to help people when they are wounded, get to a hospital, we don't fight. We don't. That's a human thing. And that's how the American military moves. You have to have those basics.
Yeah, it's incredibly discouraging to hear. I mean, there are just so many, and I've heard too the argument that, we'll ask any soft guy. They'll tell you they don't want to bring their Afghans here. It's like, have you not looked at the foundations run by Green Berets trying to get their allies out? Like, you're full of it. You're so absolutely out of your league, and people are just coming up with these crazy things and not even, it's today, where it's so easy to be a keyboard warrior but not to do your research. It's very simple. Do some quick research and you'll see Green Berets working their tails off to save their soft partners. And that brings us neatly to the next topic, which is really heavy. The moral injury component of this, because I've been watching it now for 3.5 years, watching veterans struggle with their people being left behind, and now all the people they've been helping who weren't their people to start with, but after 3.5 years, you bet your ass they're their people. So tell me about what this does to, and maybe give, just for anybody who isn't familiar with what moral injury is, like a brief explainer of moral injury and how these decisions are going to impact moral injury and our veterans.
Yeah. So, a couple of things you deal with as a veteran is, one, was your service worth it? If you served in a war, especially, was your service meaningful? Was it worth it? And then, did you make mistakes? Did you do all that you could do? Those kind of things are always kind of floating around in your mind. I wish I'd have done this better. I lost 3 friends at this base. Maybe I could have done something to save them. Most veterans know somebody in some way who has died. Those things are kind of floating around in your mind already. And then you've got the partners that we worked with. So whatever country, you are deployed in and work in, you've got those folks as well, folks in uniform and not in uniform beside you that you work with, and you take their losses with you as well. And so I think after all of the work that veterans did to do their jobs correctly, do the best they could do, help the people of Afghanistan, build friendships and camaraderie with their military, bring those guys over here to train with us, go to school with us, live with us, eat with us, and then during the withdrawal, all the work that people did, heroic work, crazy things that people did to bring out as many folks as we could that we especially knew were going to be killed. It's a real kick in the gut, a punch in the face, a fork in the eye, whatever it's painful to see our government celebrate what this volunteer brigade did around the world to get people out, give out gold, congressional gold medals and write things into these bills and have celebrations, and the State Department thanks people. And then the government asked us to do more, help them more, find places for them to live. The government really doesn't want to do it. Can we get all the civilians to do it for us? And then we forget to do the paperwork, or we decide, well, it doesn't really matter. Just send them back to whatever country they came from. We don't need to help Afghanistan anymore. Veterans are left with just one more thing to feel like shit about, to be honest, and to not sleep at night about, and to worry about, and to have to go, well, wait, was this one of the people I got out of Afghanistan? Is that who's getting sent back? And now, again, trying to figure out all these stupid bureaucratic rules and hurdles we've got to get through to keep people here that we spent time and money and family time, especially, to get over there and to bring them here and get them to other countries. And I think that's going to cause another round of pain and crisis and trauma for our veterans of all ranks. And I know from general to sergeant, people who are working on this, and they're all going to be struggling again. And this can lead to a continuing uptick in the suicide rates in the veterans. It's still going the wrong direction, and these are the kind of issues that will cause people to again question, what did I do this all for? What did I lose my friends for? What did I spend all this time trying to help some of my Afghan buddies? What did I do all that for if our government doesn't give a crap and we want to send them back to a country being run by the same terrorist groups that attacked us on September 11th? I mean, how do you rationalize that? There's nothing a counselor is going to tell you if you go in and talk to them about that. What can your buddies tell you other than, well, that really sucks? That's some bullshit. That's where we are. And I've worked a lot on suicide prevention since I retired, and I know this is going to be one of those things that's going to spike it in the wrong direction again.
I feel like the trauma of having done evacuation work at any level is like very complex. From everything I've been told about people who have either been in therapy for other things, veterans particularly. I remember one veteran telling me he was in therapy for something else and then mentioned to his therapist what he was doing with evacuation stuff. And his therapist is like, wait, what? Like how it's a little, it's just different. It's very intense, and people might not understand and tell you, well, you need to take a step back. And that's actually more injurious to some people. I mean, I've watched a lot of pain happen from people trying to tell other people in the evacuation community what to do, what they should be doing, how, and to watch. I posed this question on Twitter the other day because it was really bothering me, but how many times have you heard the worst news yet in the last 3.5 years, and how many times were you wrong? And the equation for me is always X and X minus 1, because it's always escalating in badness. Every single, since August of 2021, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And, I feel for the pain. I think you just described it very well. Now that's one more question of, did I do enough? And but how could you? I wrote this I'm like, this piece hasn't come out yet, but so I shouldn't even say it, but I'm going to say it. I described this as between, the dawdling bureaucracy under Biden and just the lack of care under Trump. It's like we all just know that give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, like it doesn't apply to Afghans. And so it's really painful when you care about them so deeply, and especially for veterans who gave so much extra. I never went to Afghanistan. I'm not a veteran. I am a civilian. I care deeply about Afghanistan, and this hurts me in a deep way, but not in the same way that it hurts a veteran who was there, who lost someone there, who, even if you didn't lose someone there, there's a good chance you left something of yourself in Afghanistan if you served there. Yeah. So it's just very painful. And I want to ask you about, because you had an event in February about veteran mental health and, the suicide epidemic. And I would love for you to talk about that and what you learned from the people who came, and what the takeaways should be from that event and what you've seen so far, basically, that can maybe help us, or at least inform us better about what we are up against in this arena.
Yeah, absolutely. So my musical side of life that I stumbled upon, we wrote the song "Hold On, Reach Out," which was a suicide prevention song that doesn't mention the word suicide, but it struck a chord with a lot of people, kind of shifted us into this world. And we put together a number of events, but we put together this one in Nashville because a high school colleague works at John Bon Jovi's bar in Nashville downtown, and he's like, "Hey, man, let's have a concert series out here. Let's do a concert that's focused on veteran mental health and really leans into suicide prevention." And I said, "This is amazing. Let's do that." So we put that together. The Bon Jovi family was very kind about inviting us to do that and wanted us to do it there. They believe, heavily in veteran mental health. The boys are children of Marine Corps veterans, which I didn't know. These were military kids when they were younger, and so we put it together, and it kind of became more than a concert. We were going to just invite people to come out and spend some time together networking and have a concert in the evening, just kind of spend the day together. And I linked up with a retiring Green Beret who's been working on mental health from the medical point of view inside the military. And we were able to get together with a huge team. We ended up with like 30 volunteers putting this conference together, a full-blown conference from I think 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. We used a facility in Nashville of a great nonprofit that let us use their site, and we got a team to come in and run the conference for us that runs it with AI power. So at the end of the conference, we had a full readout of everything we talked about. We had about 60 different groups take part in this. 4 Red Star spouses, which are spouses who have lost their loved one to suicide, which is a new program that's coming out, that's moved into the sphere now to help them form a tribe that's focused on their special needs. And they were able to take part in this. So we spent the entire day really just working on why does it happen and what are the solutions? What can we do? We wanted to get to solutions. The VA sent its director of suicide prevention out, which was excellent for him to be able to sit down with 4 spouses who had lost their husbands to suicide was really powerful. And really for all of us that have been working on this issue, it was great to hear them there and to be able to pin the Red Star on their lapel that day and recognize them as spouses who had sacrificed greatly for our nation. And so we ended up with a ton of different ideas and solutions that could be implemented, handed some of those off to the VA that they could work on. And the VA director spoke, and he gave us a real eye-opening reminder that 60% of the veterans are not going to get treatment at the VA. They're going to get help across the country with nonprofit organizations that are working on trauma and suicide prevention. And that really reminded us like the reason why we need to get all of those organizations across the country to collaborate and not compete, because we have got to be able to raise money and keep those organizations moving with the times and doing the right treatment for trauma to make this happen. So it was a real eye-opening day, a useful day. Ended with a massive concert at John Bon Jovi's. He gave us the rooftop for about 8 hours. We were up there well into the morning, had 4 or 5 different bands playing, and then our band headlined and got to, play our song and play some other great music. And it was really useful moment for everybody that was there, and they want us to come back next year and do another concert. So we're working already to put this together and keep finding ways really to ensure all those nonprofits are funded so they can do what they do best. There's some amazing ones across this country that save lives every day. And just to remind ourselves that the VA is not going to see all of the people, the majority of the people that need help are not going to be at the VA. They need to be treated in the community. So our communities need to be armed in a way to handle this and prepared for it. So there's just some wonderful initiatives that are going on. I ran into a lot of folks I served in Afghanistan with that are now, in this sphere and working on these projects. There's a great one where they're working to make sure every community has a system to invite soldiers when they separate from the military into the community. They literally know when they're leaving, Fort Drum, New York, and they're going to go back to Kansas City and live, that Kansas City grabs them before they come and brings them in, just like they're going to another military unit, and says, these are all your resources. How can we help you? Let's help you get a job. Let's get you family settled. What do you need? We're here. You're not alone. You're still on the team. Just wonderful things like that our communities could do very easily if we knew it was important. And I think we now know it is important. There's that golden moment of real danger when somebody separates from the service in any capacity, whether a 4-star or a private, and for whatever reason they separate. It's a huge shock when you come back to the civilian world. And so making sure that we get them through that first 12 months and get them set up for success is important. So we learned a ton. I was blown away at just how many people cared about this, and we want to just keep increasing it. I'm proud of all the folks that worked on it. It was amazing.
That's so cool. Transition is fragile, right? It's going from team to you, and I think that's so awesome. But I guess my follow-up question to that before we move on is, why is the VA isn't going to see everybody? Is that just because people didn't sign up for VA services, or just the capacity of the VA? Because the most heartbreaking thing I've covered a lot of heartbreaking things. I shouldn't even say it's almost impossible to try to rank things. But one of the first stories before I was a journalist, and I've mentioned this on the podcast a couple times. I don't know if I've mentioned it with you, but I had interviewed a young man who was a twin, and he had been in the reserves. He had come back from his Afghanistan deployment that his brother went on as well, because they were in the same reserve unit. And, it had been a very tempestuous deployment. It was rough on him. And when he came back, he tried to get help from the VA, and he went at a heightened moment. And they said, well, if you're suicidal, we can help you right now. Otherwise, we have to schedule you. We can't. And he wouldn't say he was suicidal. And so they, and it was a long drive for him to get there. So he didn't, want to make an appointment when he wasn't feeling like crap. Right. And so he just didn't try again. And a year after I interviewed him, just a little bit before a year after I interviewed him, I got a call from the friend who set up the interview saying his twin brother had committed suicide. And I started writing about our interview, which I had only interviewed him because he had been to Afghanistan and I hadn't. And I was writing a book about Afghanistan, and he had offered to tell me what the sand felt like, what the dirt felt like and what things looked like. And we weren't writing about the same, I wasn't writing about the same area he was in, but I loved listening to him anyway. Listening to veteran stories is such a privilege. So I just listened to everything he had to say. And so I start trying to turn this into a story, right? Tell the story of this young man. And I'm not kidding you, Jason. I just finished proofing it. And I get the call from the neighbor that he had killed himself. And it broke my heart. And then I was on a call. VA did a Facebook. This probably was 2016 or 17. I know my daughter had been born. I remember, because she was laying in her little bassinet and she wasn't a year old yet. And they did this Facebook Live thing, and you could put questions into the chat. And I'm watching it and I'm like, oh, this is great information from the VA. But I'm like, hey, I had someone I knew that I had interviewed. I explained the situation. I said, what should I have done? What could have been done for this person? And they wrote back and they said, you should tell him to join one of our groups. And I'm like, you did not fucking read this. He's dead, and that's the whole thing, is that the VA just misses the key points a lot. And it's not the VA's fault, really, that this guy didn't get the help he needed. There was a disconnect, right? But it's that disconnect that can be the difference between life and death, because maybe he would have gone back for help when he was really struggling if it hadn't have been for that moment where he felt not seen and not heard, so I guess I want to know, what is the 60%? Why is that the figure?
Yeah, what I kind of gleaned from it, and I don't know all the specifics, certainly not a VA expert, But I think he was alluding to the fact that a lot of people don't go to the VA because they've had a bad experience or someone else has, so they don't even try. There's many people who are not enrolled in the VA system because they didn't think their service, there's a lot of people that just, I don't need that. I'll go on. I'm only in for 3 years. I'm working for this other corporation. I've got health insurance. And so there's just a lot of reasons that people won't be doing that. Too far away, live in a remote area, whatever it is that the majority of veterans, they don't see. And so it is kind of incumbent on the community to have systems in place to do that, because there's a long wait line at government facilities. When you're in the military, it's that way. When you get out, it doesn't change. You wait in line, they triage. I remember one day that I finally realized I needed to get some mental health help, and I was still in the uniform. And I was in the Pentagon, so I was in my dress uniform and walked down to the clinic. I had to find it, which is not easy to do. I actually found the place. I walk up and there's a specialist there, and he's like, I said, I needed help with people, and had these thoughts, and he's like, are you suicidal right now, sir? And he like that loud as I'm standing there in front of the other people in the waiting room, and I was just like, Jesus, this is how this works. I just like, what? No specialist. I'm not thinking about. Okay, well, it's going to take a while to get you into the system, then, sir, and let's sign you up, and we'll try to get you an appointment. And I was just like, damn. I couldn't imagine. I was in uniform. I'm trying to be respectful of the system and how it worked. And you imagine being a veteran and someone tells you that, you're gonna be like, oh, fuck this, I'm out of here. Excuse my French, but it's just those little things that could be the difference between someone getting help or someone saying, whatever, I'm done. I don't need this. If that's how it's going to be, I don't want to be a part of this. It doesn't take much when you're in a fragile place. It doesn't take much to set you off. So, I think that's a piece that we have to work on. It's about knowing what to do. And there's a lot of great organizations that are working on suicide prevention and trauma, how to deal with it and get through it and build resilience. But, they're all hurting for money on the non-government side. They don't have the funds to do it at the scale they need to. So there's always a line of people. I was looking at all those nonprofits as we've been trying to help raise money for them and raise awareness and, play concert events for them and stuff. Some of them have a 6-month wait to get into the system to spend a weekend in their program. Others have restrictions like, you had to be in direct action combat, or you had to be in special operations, or you had to be this, or so. It's discouraging for people who, for many reasons, need help and they can't find the way to get help. And as you know, when someone's in crisis, especially in having suicidal ideations, they're not looking that hard for help. They're looking to end their life. So it doesn't take a lot to push them in the wrong direction. And it's hard to know what's on someone's mind and where they're at in this trauma. It's hard to tell. So this is going to be a problem for a while. The Vietnam veterans are still struggling. That's one of the larger suicide rates in their veteran population still.
Well, and then you wonder, how does that keep going? For Afghanistan veterans, it's not dissimilar. I've heard so many Afghanistan veterans tell me, now I understand what Vietnam veterans went through. I don't think that they're hated at the level that Vietnam veterans felt hated when they returned from the war, but it's a lot of similarities. And I just wanted to say, for anyone who wants to get some more thoughts on this, Rob Dufresne, your bandmate, was on with a couple other veterans doing a transition episode a while back, and it was just really astonishing to listen to all of them open up about the things that they went through. And because this is the Afghanistan Project podcast, it didn't get many viewers, but to me it was one of the most impactful episodes that I've ever recorded. Anytime I sit down with Rob, I learn so much. He is just he's an open book about those struggles, and that's a really hard thing to be open about as somebody who's that's not what you're trained to do in the military. And so learning, like, and you being able to go do that and say, hey, I need, like, that's a huge thing. I hope people are listening and keep that in mind in case they are feeling that way too. Like, admitting it, talking to people. And one thing that your comment made me think of at the end too is like, a person who's struggling with suicidal ideation doesn't always look like they're struggling. Sometimes they look really happy because they've realized, I don't have to deal with this for very much longer. Yeah. So don't ever, think that, oh, well, they seem good now. I mean, that doesn't mean that things are good. If they were not good yesterday and now they're suddenly good, don't, that anyway. There's so much education to be done. There are so many groups out there. I'm glad that they're growing, but yeah, there's so much more to be done, especially if this continues to escalate, because I've seen it in people. I've had Kate Kovarovic told me she's getting suicidal calls from volunteers again. I've had friends just, it's hard. It's really, really hard right now. So I think we should move on to the other topics because it's also hard for Afghans and, what is happening now, obviously for Afghans stateside and in third countries who don't know what's going on. But what about Afghans in Afghanistan, Jason? How is this all impacting them?
Yeah, this just trauma stacked on trauma, stacked on trauma. I think that's the best way to think about Afghanistan. It has been a constant, unstable place where your rules of life and culture change at the whim of whatever organization is running the country at the moment. That's a lot to go through in your lifetime. You imagine somebody who was alive in the 1970s, watching the end of the kingdom and the beginning of communism, and then the Mujahideen wars, and the Taliban coming in, and the NATO coming in, and the Taliban coming back in. That's a lot to absorb in a lifetime. It's going to give you a lot of trauma. For those who've been following the news in Afghanistan and talking to people in and out of the country, and especially people working on women's rights and the gender apartheid issues, the suicide rate is climbing there. It's young girls that are refusing to be forced married to some old Taliban dude because he wants another wife, or I'm not doing this. I'm not going to have that life. Once you've seen normal life, which most of Afghanistan got to experience at some point in those 20 years, you're not going to want to go back to the hell that the Taliban regime brings you. So, and it's not just young girls, it's young boys killing themselves because if they're not part of the Taliban clique, or the Haqqani clique, or, willing to be a terrorist, there's not much of a future for them. They're going to get a bit of education, and they're going to try not get killed by one of these wackadoodles running around their city. They're going to struggle to find a wife, and have a normal life. All of those things are just continue to stack up. So you've got people without homes, you've got medical issues, returning, the death rate, mortality rates increasing, especially for childbirth. All of it's just going in the wrong direction again. So this is another just crisis that the world is looking past. They are not interested in making that better. They're just trying to figure out how to accommodate, help as many people as they can, but not do anything to disturb the terrorist group that's making life living hell. So this is going to just continue. Where do you find the hope in that if you're living in Afghanistan or you're getting ready to get sent to Afghanistan? There's no light at the end of the tunnel because the world doesn't care. And I think you're going to see a lot more people struggling and doing things that they shouldn't do, because that's where they're at. Their choices are really limited.
And I think the problem is all of those numbers that you just mentioned, like the maternal mortality rate and the suicide rate, the Taliban isn't being honest about those at all. They don't want the world to know that. And they've quashed the suicide numbers from what, I remember doing an article on this, and there was an international organization that had done a pull of like a very small group, like a small place, to try to get an idea of what the larger, Afghanistan may have experienced in terms of suicides, because the Taliban had given some asinine number that just like you knew there's no way in God's green earth. And so all of these things, and they don't want you to know the maternal mortality rate. They don't want you to know any of these things. And now the question to me is, do we believe the Taliban's lies and call them out? What's our next step? Or are we going to go, this benefits us because now we don't have to give them things anymore, and we don't have, that's the next question is, are we going to keep seeing, the next bullet on my list is that Trump's advisors are lying to him. And are we going to see Trump's team continuing to go, nope, it's great, we're good, we can actually partner with these guys? Or are we going to take a moral stand and try to spread the truth? And I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I don't think any facts about Afghanistan are going to be getting to the president. He's going to get, an earful from irresponsible appointees who don't care, who probably hate Muslims, who probably hate the people of Afghanistan, who don't care about anybody who isn't, in our country. That's the sad point. I don't think that anybody who's reporting correctly within the government about what's actually happening in Afghanistan is going to have any chance in hell of getting that to President Trump or to Secretary Rubio. They're just not going to get it. I don't think they're going to make it through. There's just too many folks that don't care, that, never cared about Afghanistan. That there are folks in there who pretend to love veterans, but they don't care about what this is doing to veterans. It just doesn't matter to them. They'll use veterans as props and photographs and say they love the military, but they're not doing anything to make sure that veterans are okay. They could easily right now pull in every Afghan who's here in America and say, give us the veteran that can speak for you. And if that veteran says, yes, they will be great American citizens. I worked with them overseas. I absolutely vouch for them. They give them a citizen process right then and there. Throw them into a guaranteed citizenship process and speed it up. Let them get to work and raise their families and bring their families in. These are people that are trusted, who may have taken a bullet and literally bled for our country or to save the lives of Americans. That would take, if there's 100,000 of them, this is not going to take a very long time to sort through. And if we don't know who they are and nobody can vouch for them, that can really vet them, then we have something to work with. But to just say, well, whatever, we don't care. It's not important. It is important. For all the reasons we've talked about already, it's important. And I think if President Trump knew that, if he knew that how important this was to veterans, I think he would change his mind. I don't think he's an evil person. I don't think that, he doesn't, he dislikes veterans. I think he does care. But I don't think he's going to hear the truth from his people. They're just, they're not going to tell him.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen what he's done for the HKIA veterans, and they, I think, were very moved by how the support that he gave to them. So I hope that you're correct, because if not, what we're doing is just lining up the next terror attack, in my mind, lining up the next 9/11 and the next, and then my kids, who, and I still remember the day that I came home on 9/11 and my dad was home. He was never home early. And I remember what the words he finally said to me. He didn't talk to me for a long time. We just stared at the television, and then he told me, your life will never be the same. And he was very correct. And I don't want to have to say that to my children. Yeah. That was the whole purpose in everything that I did relating to Afghanistan, was to make the country better. It was never to see this happen. And every backslide just made me so angry, because I knew what it was backsliding towards. And it's just sickening to hear, if we just listened to the people who've experienced those decades of conflict, that have felt the loss and the devastation, and the Americans who've been working so hard Yeah, I think that maybe things would change. The last thing I wanted to ask you about is what the Taliban intends for these refugees when they get back, and what that means, not just what does that mean for Americans? I mean, we saw what they did after August of 2021. They paraded through the streets with our military hardware.
Yeah.
What are they going to do with the people we send back?
Yeah, I think there's a couple, things that'll happen. If they are members of the security forces or family members of people who are in the security forces, I think they'll be detained. They'll probably be tortured. I think they'll eventually be killed. If they're a woman, then they can include being raped in that process. If they get pregnant, they'll make them abort the baby and continue to rape them until they're tired of them and kill them. This is what's been happening. I don't see it changing in any way. They're animals. They absolutely will be waiting at every port of entry to find these people. And if you have any tie to a NATO nation, you're done. If you have any tie to human rights organizations, especially the women, that's it. They will never enjoy freedom again. They're going to be captured. They're going to be, used to make an example of. They may do it very quietly because they don't want to lose the chance to get recognized as a country, but they're going to do it. We may not get the photos and the video. It's what they're going to do, though. They've been hunting down members of the security forces that are still there and their families. They've been hunting down people who are part of human rights advocacy. It's not going to change. Absolutely no reason for them to change. We're literally, throwing chum at the sharks. Well, what do you think the shark's going to do? It's going to eat the chum. This is what we're doing. And it's just one other way they can tell other terrorist groups, hey, look, not only did we defeat America and NATO in this country, we even got them to throw out all those people who stood against us so we can kill them too. How strong are we? They don't care about anybody. We beat them so badly that they just want to wash their hands of us. So we win every time. They'll gloat. This is good for their business. They'll bring in bigger, amounts of money to raise more terrorists and get ready for the next September 11th.
Yeah, and the sick thing, as somebody who has covered these stories in the media, and I'll use this as an example. When Retrograde came out, I remember watching that and thinking, wow, what an excellent film. And I didn't think about the fact that they had shown all the people and their faces and what that meant. But at the same time, I was, if I was telling a story about somebody and a picture was wanted, it was always like, well, if you're in Afghanistan, no way in hell am I sharing your picture, right? But if you were in the States, there was the question of, do we? I've seen many NFTP, maybe not technically FTPs, but many Afghan women who were in the military be shown in like magazines and things of that nature. They didn't have SIV. What protection were they here under, I wonder? And are you going to send them back and their pictures are on? So the reason I bring up Retrograde, as you know, Jason, but maybe some of the listeners don't, is Retrograde's been pulled off air because of showing those faces, because the handsome young dude in it, Omar Khan, I think was his name. I'm sorry if I didn't get that right, and I'll check that. But very handsome young guy. They had a nickname for him that was like about how handsome he was, but he was recognized and was slaughtered while he was tortured and died. But, slaughter is a slaughter. The Taliban love to do that. They beat you so badly that like all of the blood vessels in your body, if you've seen a body after a Taliban beating, it is nothing but marks. And your body can't survive that. Bruises, I should say, not marks. So, and now his widow is suing National Geographic for that. Wow. That's the new development. I had not heard. That's a recent change. But all these other people that thought, okay, well, I'm safe to put my face out because I'm in the U.S. now. I'm worried about what happens to them.
Yeah.
And it's just It's unconscionable to me, especially when you look, the rationale for TPS. It's like you said, tourism bullshit. Two people with national security concerns. Okay, what were they? And like I thought about this, and my initial thought was, okay, so send them back. You got national security concerns, send them back. But like, actually tell me what those national security concerns were. Because there's a reason that the Biden administration didn't send them back. And it's because they would be slaughtered. So can we find them an alternate place? Can we do something? And like, using different names. Unless it's freaking Abdullah Qayyum Zakir, Amir Khan Mataki, fucking Sirajuddin Haqqani, and it's like they're literally their nom de guerre. Like, okay, they use different names. Tell me, was one of them a terrorist name? Like, tell me why this is so important to you. They're using anything they can find to get rid of this. And I fully say, if you came here and you have an issue, if you're tied to the Taliban in any way, you should not be here.
Yep.
If you pop on something, if you had your fingerprints on an IED, I don't care if the Taliban forced you to emplace it. I do not want you here, Like, and I understand that they would force people to emplace IEDs. I get that. But like, no, that's a ding, ding, ding. You're not allowed. But that's not what I'm hearing about these individuals. So it's just so...
I was a witness in a case under the Biden administration. They had somebody detained, said we can't let this guy out. He's detained. We need to send him back. He can't be vetted. He can't enter the citizenship process in any way. And I was like, well, what are the charges? And the government wouldn't say. And so I gave witness to what's happening in Afghanistan, to people who are tied to working with the military. This guy had worked with the military down in Kandahar. His family was known to the Taliban because he was helping the American military base. And when it went to trial, I sat and listened to the government's case. And I watched the judge's face. We were doing it on Zoom. And it was a DC-based immigration judge. And she almost lost it because they basically had no case. There was nothing he had done. They just didn't think he needed to be here. They didn't think he was under enough danger to be here. And I was like, he worked with the U.S. military in Kandahar, the homeland of the Taliban. They know who he is. What do you mean he's not to be in danger? And the judge was like, so you're saying you don't think he's going to be in danger, but he's not a threat to America, but you don't want him here. And the government was like, yeah, that's our position. And that verdict came back very quickly. That's stupid. The judge was just like, let him out of detention. Why was he even detained? Just because you didn't think he needed to be here? For no reason at all. Like, they had nothing. I mean, we're all waiting for the evidence. I was like you. I was like, his fingerprint on an ID. Did his name pop up? Is his uncle, in the Haqqani network? Or nothing. Literally, we just don't think he should be here. And I think that's basically the default case that this administration's looked at too. We don't think they should be here. They should be fine back home. That's crazy.
Yeah. Was that's
not how the system should work.
Did you say how he came here? Did he come on original?
Part of the original.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that's the hard part. Cause vetting was not good at that point. No. It was like you got on a plane cause you got whatever. And I know that there was a lot of concern about that. Was actually NGIC did the vetting that found the people with the fingerprints. And from what I've heard, they were deported, which probably rightfully so. Although at the time I was very concerned about, well, what if they weren't, It's so hard. This whole process will make you turn your brain in 20 different ways from Sunday in the course of 24 hours. But in the end, in the final calculus, it's just that this is the wrong choice. Yeah. And it's the way to do another 9/11. It's the way to destabilize further a country that is already just... And it's like, could we have just not screwed the pooch in the first place? Could we have just maybe not left the country to be taken over by the Taliban? Yeah. And negated so many years of war. And and I shudder. I don't want to say that either, because it gives fodder to that feeling within veterans that what they did wasn't enough. Because what they did was enough. They were able to make gains, but our leaders, decided to pull out too many things too quickly and not let those gains be sustainable. And it's just really sad. It's hard. I never want a veteran to think that I don't value everything they did, because I do.
Yeah.
That was a game changer. Everything that was done on the ground in Afghanistan was a game changer. It is the leaders who hold full accountability for everything that has happened and that continues to happen. And they will be the ones written into the history books, but that doesn't matter to me as much as preserving as many lives as possible now.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to bring up, or any parting words you have, Jason?
I think we went around the globe on that one and back again. So I just hope that President Trump and the Vice President and secretaries, the cabinet, really sit down and think about what we're doing with our Afghanistan allies, and our veterans could help them sort this out very quickly. There's, believe me, there's a lot of veterans who would be very willing to get this all sorted quickly and make sure that everybody who should be here is here, and everybody who shouldn't be is not. I mean, most people in the military are pretty law and order. That's not the problem.
Yeah.
We just want to do it right, and I think it could be. We don't want to just say that the Biden administration dragging their feet for freaking 4 years should be rewarded, or should lay on the shoulders of all of these folks and all the veterans who have worked on this issue. Let's solve it now. Let's make a solution that helps our veteran community and helps all of our allies and helps our future operations, because our soft guys are not going to stop being deployed around the world. We need partners. We need future partners. Let's not make it harder for them.
Yep. And there are organizations so ready and willing to partner with them. All the people from No One Left Behind, Moral Compass Federation, Global Friends of Afghanistan, 1208 Foundation, full of veterans and hard chargers who are intimately familiar with all of this. I want to see that happen. I want to see those groups be able to make that change and work with leadership. And I can't give up that hope, that there can be an about face. And I listened to, I didn't listen to the actual hearing, but I read the really incredible quotes from people who questioned Nome about TPS. And there are some it was the first time people pushed back, and I hope there's more. There's got to be more. So
there's got to be. Somebody's misleading her and other cabinet leaders, and we need to be better at filtering out the folks who have really bad ideas.
Yeah.
Let's do the right things. We can do it.
And hopefully this time it won't be partisan, because there were so many of the things that happened post withdrawal had a partisan bent. They were meant to bang on Biden, and he deserved it, right? I think, but so did others who preceded him. It's not just Biden.
All the presidents screwed this up. Yeah.
Exactly. So
he just made the biggest final one.
Right. And I want whatever happens next, I really just want it to be bipartisan, and we care, and we care about the legacy that we leave for our veterans, and we care about the people who stood beside us, and just to do the right thing. That would just That's all. It
would be a really good thing right now.
I'm just going to cross everything and not.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. It's always so enjoyable to chat with you, even about hard topics.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you to everybody for listening. As always, Tasha Kaur, and hope to see you again soon.